So recently, a bunch of Unaired pilots found their way online, dating back to the 90s. What I want to do is look at these pilots and determine two things. 1. Did it have potential? And 2. How different would popular culture be if this pilot was picked up for series? Today we're opening up the pilot vault and looking at the pilot for a show called Applewood 911, a comedy that has potentially the strangest plot summary of all the ones we've looked at so far. This show centres around two police officers, a gay cop and a straight cop, the latter of whom does not share the other cop's feelings. Together they take on some incredibly goofy cases. Now there are quite a few familiar faces in this pilot. We've got Bryan Cranston for starters. He plays one of the councilmen who's in charge of all the meetings and stuff at the town hall. Oh, and it also has Deborah Jo Rupp. This pilot was shot the same year that 70s show debuted, back in 1998. So I wonder if this show had been successful, would she have had time to be Kitty on that 70s show and subsequently that 90s show? Who knows? Probably not. Right, let's check out Applewood 911. It's a very different kind of comedy from that 70s show. You'll see what I mean as we get into it. We start with Christopher McDonald, a cop who is our main character. You may recognise him as Shooter McGavin from Happy Gilmore. He's investigating the disappearance of a statue. He radios into the station and we hear Kitty from that 70s show unique voice.
First the dog napping of 82, now this is a spree.
A dog barks in the background, which meant that I immediately had to pause it and go and calm down my own dog. I hate it when shows play stock audio of a dog barking. I know that it adds a little something extra to the scene and makes it feel that bit more real, but they've got to know that most people at home have dogs, and when dogs hear another dog barking, they bark. I don't know, you'd think they'd think about it and stop using dogs barking on TV. It's just irritating. We then cut to the Applewood City Hall, which is one of those temporary buildings, as the real building hasn't been built yet. It reminds me of that meme where it points out how every school had those temporary buildings that were there longer than most students were. I don't imagine the town hall would have ever been built and we would have always had this temporary building. It might have been funnier if they had added a year to the sign, so it said like coming soon 1989. I swear I've seen that done before. Oh yeah, The Office. When they looked at the Dunder Mifflin website and it said that it was coming soon in like 2004 or something, years before the episode took place. But yeah, I just think that joke would have added a little something to it and would have showed us how slow everything moves in the town. One of the cops is talking but then gets distracted by his own muscles. That's his entire personality, by the way. He's very one note. It's so weird seeing this show so soon after I watched Lookwell. Two slightly surreal cop shows. The gay cop then says this.
I mean, I'm not gay or anything, but doesn't this guy have a nice ass?
Yeah, I'm a little bit worried about this show. We watched a pilot last week that had some really poorly aged jokes about being gay, and I did have a feeling that this show was going to have that same lack of tact. You can make gay jokes without it being outrageous. Just look at Lookwell. That show did it really well, but I have a feeling this show was relying too much on that whole it's funny because gay type of humour. It's very late 90s, early 2000s. We randomly get a cutaway gag, like we're watching an episode of Family Guy. Really weird, didn't fit at all. Then the sheriff goes to visit his son to question him over the disappearance of a statue. Apparently the statue that went missing was dedicated to some kind of local legend called Skip. They keep hyping him up and talking about how important he was to the town, kind of like how they spoke about little Sebastian in Parks and Rec. This show made me laugh out loud for the first time during this touching scene between the sheriff and his son.
It's about me worshipping Lucifer. You can't stop it.
I know, son. You're still going to church though, right?
Oh, yeah.
So,
that's a solid line, isn't it? Well done. I'll tell you what, I wasn't expecting Christopher McDonald's comedic timing to be so good, but he's incredible in this. He doesn't phone it in at all. He really does give it his all, as though he genuinely cared about this performance. I appreciate it when actors do that. Some emotional music starts playing in the background when the sheriff starts talking about his ex-wife, but this is very quickly replaced by some kooky cop show music. They go to a diner and we get another great line, this time from the waitress.
Every time there's a crime, you suspect Matt. It's so unfair. Anyway, he's in jail.
Oh look, it's Bryan Cranston. Would this have been prior to Malcolm in the Middle? Yeah. 2 years before that show, and 4 years after he was in Seinfeld, which is weird because I figured someone would have saw him in that episode of Seinfeld and given him more work. He was hilarious in that show. He was better than just a one-off part in a sitcom. They answer a call. A man is buried up to his neck in the ground. They discuss ways to get him out, but can't figure out a way to do it. So what do? They leave him there, and they go and answer another call. There's a gorilla on the loose. I think this is meant to be a real gorilla, and they're just leaning into the surreal side of things, which is fine because this show was already filled with surrealism. It's not like in Paul Blart Mall Cop 2 where they had Paul Blart fighting an emu and he didn't even try to convince the audience that it was anything other than a prop. I remember watching that scene and thinking, this is really dumb, but they get away with it in this pilot because, like I said, they were already leaning into the surrealism. We get another solid line. The sheriff declares that the gorilla is related to the case. He says that the missing statue and the man buried up to his neck are related to that gorilla, to which the other cop says,
More of a creationist myself.
Little lines like that really show how well written this pilot was. The script is great. I suppose the big problem lies with it just feeling like it was missing something. I can't quite put my finger on what exactly, but it's definitely not enough the way it is. The sheriff and his partner go to a garage and talk with a used car salesman. It's here where they find out that the gorilla that was causing trouble earlier wasn't an actual gorilla. He was a man dressed up in a gorilla costume. What a twist. They then tried to pull the old fella out of the ground by hooking a rope around his neck and tying it to a car. At no point do they believe that this is a terrible, terrible idea. The sheriff then finds out that the buried guy was a gambling addict, and the people who buried him were trying to send a message. I'll play the clip because it's a scene that is funnier if you just see it.
Clearly they're sending him a message. He's buried in debt. They've had it up to here. And they're not afraid to play dirty.
Long-winded sons of bitches, aren't they?
See, that's solid. The script for this show was great. There's loads of incredible lines in it. They have a town meeting in the diner, and the waitress says that they have to order something, so the councilman orders one coffee to split between them all. Bryan Cranston then reveals that someone has sent him one of the statue's legs in the mail, like how when people take a hostage and then mail body parts back to the family. It's a solid bit, well done. We get a bit more insight into the two police officers. The gay cop starts talking about how he was attracted to the sheriff when he first met him as a child. Honestly, if they didn't spell out the plotline that this cop had feelings for the other one, I never would have known. It really only shows in the form of him occasionally making references to being gay. I'm not sure why this was even a plot point, to be honest. Now I think about it, that really weird aspect of it might be what ultimately made this show fail, because it really doesn't work, and they clearly leaned into it a bit too much with it being part of the show's pitch and everything. I reckon if you cut that storyline, then this pilot would really be something special. Bryan Cranston is then repeatedly knocked into the table by the gorilla. God, he's come a long, long way since, hasn't he? Who would have thought that this guy, getting beaten up by a man in a gorilla costume, would one day play one of the greatest characters to ever grace our TV screen? They figure out that the person who stole the statue was actually Bryan Cranston, and they catch him soaring off the head of the statue in his backyard. The two police officers make a wish that every case they work on will go as well as the one they just solved, but once again they're looking at a future that was never meant to be, as this pilot was not picked up for series. Overall, this was a pretty decent show. Very much in the vein of Police Squad, even more so than Luckwell. It's a shame that it was never picked up, but it doesn't surprise me, especially with how weird the unrequited love story was and how they forced her into it. So where would this rank among the other unaired pilots that we've looked at? Well, it was solid, so we're looking at the higher rankings. I'd say that it wasn't as funny as Times Square was, but it did have a certain charm to it, so I'm gonna place it right after there. Right, are there any other unaired pilots you want me to talk about? Let me know in the comments and I'll give them a watch. And subscribe, help us reach 4K. Right, I'll let you go. Bye.